Thanks very much, Marcus, and welcome everyone. My name is Manisha Thomas, and I am delighted to be here with all of you for this first session of 4 this week at HNPW on accountability to affected populations. So today we're going to be looking at a new interagency toolkit for community feedback mechanisms, the operational guiding principles and standards for collective approaches to community feedback. I won't spoil it because I know that Jesse and all our speakers are going to speak to it, but I just wanted to flag that that's what we'll be doing. Once we have opening remarks from Jesse, who I'll introduce momentarily, we will set the scene around this new interagency toolkit and then have 2 panel discussions, the first being on what common challenges are addressed by the operational guiding principles and standards. And then the second panel will be how have the operational guiding principles and standards been tested in the field? And then we'll have time for your questions and we'll get some answers from our various panelists. And we do have a great lineup, but I will introduce them as they come on screen and when they're going to be speaking during the session. So firstly, I'm very happy to introduce Jesse Wood, who is Chief Emergencies and Transitions, Policy and Program Department of the World Food Program. And Jesse is also the co-chair of the Interagency Standing Committee Task Force 2 on accountability to affected people. So Jesse, can I ask you to please outline the main challenge in community feedback for collective accountability to affected populations and people, and why is there such a need for such a package?
Thanks so much, Manisha, and thank you to everybody that's joined. It's really great to be part of this first session of 4, and great to see the global interest in what we think is a really important topic that we've been working quite diligently on within Task Force 2. So a real pleasure to be here with you today and to try to address your question, Manisha. So I think we all know that working together to listen to and respond meaningfully to community feedback is central to how we uphold our commitments to AAP as individual organizations, and most importantly, as community of response actors. Organizations have clearly advanced in establishing the systems that allow them to receive questions, requests, concerns, and complaints from individuals, which enables us to quickly identify errors, address gaps, and connect people to the information and services they need. So that's been going very well, but using the insights and findings from community feedback to inform response-level decisions, I think it still clearly remains a challenge, and this has been observed across a number of different country operations, despite the advancements that we've seen in the way that agencies work to strengthen their own mechanisms for feedback. So whether we call them community feedback mechanisms, complaint and feedback mechanisms, feedback and response mechanisms, they can all help us to understand the evolving needs, perceptions, and experiences of the communities we serve. But to ensure our individual efforts can cascade to have a positive impact on the quality of a response, a collective approach is really necessary. And that's why since 2021, a broad range of entities, including UN agencies like WFP and UNICEF, which you'll hear from today, the IFRC, NGOs, and research institutions, we've all been involved in tackling this area of work, which has culminated in quite a bit of learning and the development of a package of operational guiding principles and standards for guiding collective approaches to community feedback. So the co-leading agencies of this work stream are UNICEF, UNHCR, and WFP, as well as IFRC. And we have colleagues from each of those agencies here to speak with us today about it. So that's all I'm going to say. I think it's better that we now turn to the real experts on the panel to present against these questions. Thanks a lot, Manisha.
Thanks so much, Jesse. And before we turn to the panel, actually, we're going to turn to Amanda, who's going to set the scene for us before we go to the panel. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Amanda Maher, who is an accountability to affected populations, AAP consultant who is hosted by UNICEF and who's had a leading role in the consultations that have led to the development of the operational guiding principles and standards for collective approaches to community feedback. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I'm determined not to use the acronym because we are often a very acronym-rich place. So Amanda, let me ask you first, how were the operational guiding principles and standards for collective approaches to community feedback developed, and what issues do they try to tackle?
Thank you very much, Manisha, and thanks everybody for coming today. So Jesse had, as Jesse had alluded to earlier, the development of this package dates back to a few years ago, where a technical working group under the Interagency Standing Committee Results Group 2 on Accountability to Affected People was set up to better understand and tackle the most persistent challenges around how we meaningfully interact with communities and use information from those interactions to improve the quality of our interventions. Since then, and under the leadership of the Task Force on Accountability to Affected People, our dedicated work stream is focused on ensuring these learnings are fully validated by and can be of practical value to both leadership and practitioners in the field, supporting everything that's already been underway to advance us towards those common goals in AAP. So what the evidence from country operations is telling us, and from the consultations, desk reviews that have happened over the course of those many years, is that one, community feedback is not being sufficiently used to inform programming. And while feedback can be acted on locally, there is still an issue with feeding this information up to inform larger scale adjustments. And this concerns how well we link our systems for feedback with our frameworks for planning, implementation, monitoring, and of course, in how our organizations share data and findings with each other and interpret that together with other response data. Two, the mechanisms for feedback that are set up to do exactly this are often misrepresented, under-resourced or under and misutilized. So while the intention of establishing feedback mechanisms is to increase accountability and make sure everybody has a voice, we sometimes observe the opposite if the systems we set up aren't adequately designed, particularly according to local information, the participation of local actors. So without taking stock of and aggregating information from all of those channels, or making space from the smaller and more informal avenues to feed into this aggregation understanding, we're working with an incomplete or distorted picture of community feedback at best. And the last one is that I think we just need to be more systematic in how we engage in this two-way communication with communities. So in addition to what was just mentioned, communities still feel that the feedback process is a little extractive and we're not adequately articulating how we take action to address their feedback. And this is just because we often don't track that, because the impact of what a community feedback mechanism does is something usually not included in monitoring frameworks. So the collective interpretation of feedback and agreement on what to do about that isn't really integrated into regular programming cycles just yet. So our solution really was to establish this baseline understanding of what community feedback mechanisms are, what they do, what their components are, and then create a set of realistic and flexible, but still somewhat rigorous set of principles that would guide the efforts to strengthen community feedback mechanisms in a systems approach. So from the individual channels in place to deal with feedback at the activity, project, or office level, to the mechanisms for feedback we have at the scale of the response.
Super. Thanks so much, Amanda. And I think that the fact that we're not using the community feedback mechanisms as we really need to be, either they're not being used as much as they should be, or that they're being seen as being misused or misrepresented, is a serious gap in our way of actually achieving AAP. So what is in the in the operational guiding principles and standards for collective approaches to community feedback package, and who's the intended audience?
So I think I've got a visual that might help accompany this response, but essentially, short and sweet, the package really aims to provide local NGOs, INGOs, international NGOs, UN agencies, Red Cross, civil society organization, all different actors involved in emergency response, a means to link and align their different systems for listening and responding to affected communities. So some of you might be familiar with the visual, the cycle that's there on the screen. It's the different stages of feedback. It's often used to illustrate the stages of a feedback mechanism. And this is the framing that we are using for the operational guiding principles and standards, which are really the guiding principles themselves are actually the set of overarching statements that enable this line of sight between feedback and the decisions that we make in response to them. The principles themselves are really for the attention of people responsible for mainstreaming accountability standards in a response, whilst the standards themselves are minimum actions underneath the guiding principles that are for the attention of practitioners who are often involved in setting up, managing, and coordinating the integration of different processes and tools for managing community feedback in a response. We have a glossary and 3 adaptable templates that can be used to support aligning these approaches specifically for how we document, how we analyze, and how we track actions taken in response to community feedback at different levels. And by different levels, I mean individual, joint or interagency, CFMs, as well as for collective initiatives that all contribute ultimately to this improvement of programming and system-wide advancement in AAP.
Super. Thanks very much, Amanda. And how are these principles and standards distinct from other global standards or tools that used for harmonization?
It's a really good question. I think we can also, I think this might help too. So the approach taken with the operational guiding principles and standards, it kind of ensures that there's this baseline that all the organizations can use to cross-check, ensure their individual efforts to strengthen and standardize their own mechanisms for community feedback in their country operations or across their country operations can also bear fruit at the collective level. So we're looking really at the operational guiding principles and standards addressing different scenarios. For example, those where a single organization is collecting feedback through multiple channels, so a hotline and a help desk, and would like to analyze those different types of information together. And also looks at the scenario where 2 or more organizations are working in the same area or delivering the same intervention or program, and they want to share and triangulate the feedback that they receive through those. And then, of course, the interagency initiative or working group that is really looking at identifying the main trends in what the perceptions are, the needs, and the main categories of feedback to agree on some concrete actions to take in terms of improving the response. So the most exciting part, I think, of this, the most distinct part, is it focuses on processes of collective problem solving and understanding how this happens and can be used really across all of those different levels.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. And actually, the next question I was going to ask you is, how do we know that they can work? And what are the main learnings and how we move forward? And I saw that somebody had actually just posed a question in the Q&A saying, are there ways to monitor the effectiveness of the mechanism or not? And if so, how? So I don't know. I think they're quite similar questions. But yeah, how do we know this works?
Yeah, that's definitely a really big part for us. So if we go over to the next slide, we'll also have some of the big areas that stand out right now. I know they're very large, but the reality is that, you know, the package is a little bit more of a palpable and articulate version of what we've already been building towards. Even if we just considered all the different parties that participated in a conversation around the package, what it might mean to them, and how they've been actively integrating in some shape or form the principles and standards, that the feedback that we've had is very substantive. But of course, the package is just a fraction of the work. It's a lot of time and energy that needs to be spent in interpreting how it can be used as a vehicle for learning and improvement. It is a vehicle for adaptation, just like your community feedback mechanism is. And last year, we engaged something like 19 countries across 5 regions. We were able to see how rich and varied those different interpretations were, depending on who was present in the conversations, what resources were available on the table, what frameworks or processes were already in place. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that in the panel discussion, but these are the big questions, you know, our data responsibility in terms of augmenting our overall standards for safe and responsible data processing, because we potentially pick up sensitive feedback, including allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse, across any channel at any time. So trying to minimize risk to the individual before that allegation is encountered and afterwards as well is a really big area of focus for us. And for coordination, really looking at, you know, how do the different coordination structures collectively define what information they need to make the decisions and adapt their processes and systems, set the parameters for measuring how the system is performing, exactly to that question. You know, for example, how are links being made between the information we receive through our needs assessments, our perception surveys, our community feedback, and our decision making. And of course, finally, on communication and training, this is really about, you know, consistent messaging, but also how we set up the kind of pathways for learning around how the package and others can be of value to different stakeholders that have a role in a mechanism at the collective level. That's all for me, guys. Over to the next very exciting part of this.
Super. Thanks so much, Amanda, for introducing us to the package of guiding principles and standards. And as you said, I think the panel will be able to unpack a little bit more sort of what's there in the package and how it can be used as well. So we're going to turn to our first panel, and that is looking at what common challenges are addressed by the operational guiding principles and standards. And for this panel, we've got 4 speakers. We have Carla Daher. I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name, Carla. Sorry. who is an emergency specialist focusing on AAP in the Office of Emergency Programs at UNICEF. Welcome, Carla. We have Nagar Gobadi, who is the global lead for the community feedback mechanisms at WFP in Rome. Welcome, Nagar. We have Pianos Manjera, who's an associate information management officer specifically on AAP, working with UNHCR's Regional Bureau for the East, Horn of Africa, and the Great Lakes. Welcome, Pianos. And last but not least, we have Raphael Okorapot, who is AAP Senior Manager in Kampala with ULearn. Welcome, Raphael. So I'm going to pose, oh, sorry, I was totally wrong. We have 5 people on this panel. I didn't scroll down far enough on my sheet. I apologize, Alex. We have Alexandra Sikot-Levesque, who is Manager for Community Engagement and Accountability with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. So welcome to all of you. My first question is to you, Alex. When it comes to coordinating complaints and feedback mechanisms or community feedback mechanisms, what are some of the biggest concerns from IFRC's perspective, given that you're often the interlocutor between national societies and other response actors?
Thanks, Manisha, and hi, everyone. Well, it's important to remember that the conversation we're having today started maybe 10 years ago, if not more, which of course makes me feel old, and I'm sure others on the call today will feel the same. But at least for me, it started really around the time of the Nepal earthquake in 2015, where an interagency community feedback mechanism was set up. And at the time, feedback was collected through a variety of different channels, through different actors, from the Red Cross to even scouts to local radio stations, so that we could inform the response at a very hyper-local, at the district level, but also nationally to the government and even also international humanitarian actors. So, of course, a lot of changes have happened in the past decades since we kind of set up this at the time, innovative system. But we're still facing, of course, today similar challenges. So what's interesting is that 10 years ago, it was hard to come upon feedback data that was collected not anecdotally, that was really systematically collected. And most agencies that we were talking to at the global level at the time couldn't really come to the table with feedback data that they were collecting. But today, I think most humanitarian actors do collect community insights in some shape or form. So there's really a huge opportunity for highly local, timely, and open-ended, and as well continuous candid feedback from affected communities, so that we can really collectively be more effective and have more positive long-term impact, of course, within the communities that we support. But information management and ultimately decision makers as well are really besieged by huge amounts of data and many competing priorities, of course. So making use of this community evidence is still really challenging. So more and more data is being collected by local actors, especially, but often it's not acted upon, as we know, and especially it's not aggregated with other data perhaps collected by international actors, because these data don't necessarily speak to each other. And so often that leads to duplication. So ultimately, it's an immense challenge to bring this data together and to translate it into really actionable recommendation. So of course, as we know and we talk about often, the very architecture of the response or the response that we work in is a significant barrier to nimble working. So that's why over the past 10 years, the discussion really has been, what could we put in place then so that we can alleviate some of these barriers? So I think that the operational guiding principles and standards we're talking about today are here for that reason.
Super. Thanks so much, Alex. And when you said 10 years ago, yeah, I feel old as well, because I remember that. And it is great to sort of see the progress that's being made, because as you said, there's so much data that is collected. And if we don't have it in a way that's manageable for decision makers, then that's going to be really complicated. And I guess related to that, maybe I can ask, how do you make sure then that everybody uses the operational guiding principles and standards to make sure that that data is able to speak to each other?
Yeah, so this is where I think this is the $100 million question. I like to say that everyone wants coordination, but no one wants to be coordinated. I'm not the one who came up with that sentence, but I've heard that over the years, and I can't can say that it's very true. So ultimately, I think the success of the principles and standards really depend on the goodwill of all organizations who are here today on this call and beyond, and ensuring that it goes beyond branding, logos, and whatnot, and that we really see the value of working collectively together. Ultimately, of course, as individual organizations, we have our own accountability systems. We have to respond to our own individual demands. But we need to start seeing the benefit of working collectively, and that it will help improve the way we work as individual organizations, but as well collectively, if we're able to use these standards, and so that we can share this information more effectively. Because, for instance, for a Red Cross, Red Crescent International Society, the data we're collecting might be useful, of course, for the World Food Program or UNICEF or other colleagues on the call today, but similarly the same. For us, it would be useful to have better access to also data from other organizations and to bring it together. So we really need to start seeing the benefits. And so ultimately, how do we ensure that? I mean, I think it's about outreach and, of course, goodwill and having the right mindset for change in the way we work.
Super. Thanks so much, Alex. And I do think that it really kind of embodies why we talk about accountability to affected populations. If we really want to put people at the center of what we do, we need to make sure that we're taking the feedback that we get from them and really use that to inform our operations. So thanks very much for that, Alex. Raphael, let me turn to you. As a co-chair of the AAP working group in Uganda, you're dealing directly with the interagency feedback mechanism that you have there. And there you call it the feedback, referral, and resolution mechanism, the FRRM, which is the same as a CFM, as we often use different language, but ultimately it's the same thing as it's a community feedback mechanism. And so based on your experience working with the mechanism, that collective mechanism that you have in Uganda, how has that worked, and what are some of the challenges in terms of coordination that you're facing as you're working with this collective CFM complaints and feedback mechanism? So I'm trying not to use so many acronyms.
Thank you so much, Manisha. Just to bring to the attention of all our audience or participants here is that within the Uganda refugee response, we currently have a number of different mechanisms.
Sorry, Raphael, you've frozen for me. Is it just me?
No, it seems like we unfortunately lost him. I think we'll have to return to him later.
Well, I will come back to you, Raphael. Hopefully we'll get you back. Alex, then let me ask you another question. Do you think... Oh, sorry, now you're back, Raphael. We lost you for a minute.
Okay. Oh, sorry about that. I think it should be a network issue. Most of these are actually at the intelligence level. And speaking to your question, just allow me to share my experience from using the collective CFMs, the complaints and feedback mechanisms in the Uganda refugee response. You realize that there's really a need to ensure availability of safe and accessible intelligence mechanisms throughout the week in the different locations. And this is very paramount to enable different client categories to reach out to the partners, and also for the partners to provide the relevant and timely feedback to the communities. And we clearly realize that there is no one-based mechanism that you can use to reach out to all the refugees. And that's why we have a mix of the different mechanisms in place for us to engage the different client groups. The other great lesson that we pick using the complaints and feedback mechanisms is that there is really need to ensure the existence of the interagency standing operating procedures to help the different partners that we work within the Uganda refugee response to systematically collect, record, refer, and analyze, and also report on the client feedback. We must, of course, note that it's not enough just to have the SOPs in place, but it's very important to ensure that we disseminate this across the different actors that we're working with, so that we're able to be at the same pace as the response actors. The other equally very important lesson that I picked from my experience over the years is the benefit of establishing a network of the complaints and feedback mechanisms, focal points across the various stakeholders of the refugee response. This really helps to reduce the timeline for referring and responding to the feedback. There is this great saying that everybody's responsibility is nobody's what? A responsibility. So I think for us in Uganda, you realize that each of the organization has a focal point, and this has helped a lot when you look at the call trends, the issues that come from the different mechanisms. The resolution rate is really improving when we have these in place within the response. Having coordination of the various stakeholders is very critical, and this being done through the AAP Task Force and the CWC, communicating with communities within the Uganda refugee response, has really helped us a lot to promote the collective approaches to AAP within the Uganda refugee response, and also sharing a lot of experiences and best practices on how we are doing it at the different organizations. So this, to us, is standing out and helping us to support the bigger response actors. The need to also continuously review the functionality of our existing collective feedback mechanisms is something that we've also learned over time. It's very important to ensure that we consistently review our existing components and feedback mechanisms to ensure that they are really functional and helping us to listen to the communities that we seek to serve, and also to really ensure that the communities themselves feel that these are working. It is very critical, and it's something that we've learned over time. So lastly, maybe just to speak to that, is the need for capacity building for all the response actors, especially the frontline staff. And for us here in Uganda, we've really received a lot of support from the interagency feedback and referral and resolution mechanism team, the IFRRM, supporting majorly all the focal points within the organizations. And whenever there is need within an individual organization for them to be supported on how to utilize the system and how to be able to, close the loop, the team is readily available. And we've seen a very big difference when there is when the staff capacities have been built in as far as really helping to close the feedback loop within the Uganda refugee response. In terms of the challenges, coordination challenges, yes, integration of the different feedback that we receive from the different mechanisms has been a big challenge. But already within the Uganda refugee response, there are already plans to have version 3 of the IFRRM, which will definitely be able to integrate or to have different features within the system to allow feedback from the different mechanisms. Say, for example, the community feedback meetings, they help this as well to be, integrated into the system. And then the other challenge is that there is need for always the continuous mapping of the functional feedback and response mechanisms across the response. And currently, we're trying to ensure that partners continuously update the functional mechanisms, and this information is readily shared widely. Lastly, the issue of delays in responding to the feedback and referrals has of course been also featuring. But like I mentioned, with capacity building and also continuous updating of the referral focal points, we realize that there are some improvements in as far as closing the feedback loop. Thank you.
Super.
Back to you, Manisha.
Thanks very much, Raphael. I've got a couple more questions for you, Alex and Raphael, before we turn to the next one, but I'm going to ask you to keep it short because we're running a little behind time, please. Do you think that the new operational guiding principles and standards will help address those challenges that you've just outlined, Raphael? And then also, do both of you sort of think that how will they help the operational standards and principles? How are they going to help local actors in the mechanisms for collective action in community feedback? I don't know who wants to go first. Whoever gets their mic first.
Okay,
Alex,
I
you
guess
go.
I'll go first. Sorry, your first question was around how
the operational principles and standards will help address some of the challenges that you just outlined, or Raphael just outlined.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think it's a very comprehensive package, and I think we had so many discussions among different organizations, and we came with very different angles. I think our colleagues will talk about that in a minute. But the fact that there's so much work that's been done, I think in trying to apply to our different realities and the way our different organizations work and identifying those commonalities, so that at least we can have something that is standardized across the board. Was such a long process. I think that for that reason, I think it will help address those challenges, because we have tried to find the best possible solutions. I think ultimately, it will, it will only work, as I said earlier, if people are willing, to kind of come together and address those challenges together, and to adopt the principles, and to try to contextualize them, especially to their context, because every context is different. Every channel will be different in different countries, so these will need to be adapted. And of course, our organizations here are committed to continuing providing that support. But ultimately, I think accountability is a bit of a two-way street. So we need to change, ourselves and our systems if we're going to be successful. And so the same way we often ask communities to change their own behaviors or to take actions, right? So I think if we come in with that mindset, I think these can work.
Sorry, my mouse got stuck. Raphael, how do you think that the principles and standards will also help local actors in the mechanisms for collective action in community feedback?
Yeah, thank you so much, Manisha, this. I personally feel that this is going to help a lot the local actors. As you may know that it's not really easy to run some of the feedback mechanisms if you are just alone as a local actor. But the ability to work together with the other agencies within the Uganda Refugee Response, definitely utilizing these principles, the guiding principles and standards, is going to be a very good opportunity for the local actors that are still in the process of building their systems and mechanisms around accountability.
Super. Thanks so much, Raphael and Alex. I'm going to now turn more to sort of how the principles and standards have been tested in the field. So Pianos, I'm going to turn to you first. Since UNHCR has invested in testing the operational guiding principles and standards, do you have any examples that could help illustrate how the standards can be useful in practice? And what have you learned so far from trying to apply them at the field level?
Okay, thanks, Manisha. Confirm you hear me? Okay, good. As UNHCR East Africa Regional Bureau, what we did after receiving the standards is it was earmarked to be tested in Ethiopia, Uganda, and South Sudan. But what we did is we expanded this exercise to other operations like Somalia and Burundi. So in Burundi, the standards helped us to put together a feedback and response system. How we did this is we adopted the template logbook. This is like the logbook that guides how we designed the data collection or the intake form. So from this system, this is a system that we are planning as the operation together with the Burundi operation to expand it to include all the partners that UNHCR work with, including the interagency as well. So from this exercise, what we have learned so far is that there is need for us to at least consider the technical capacity in the operation with regards to the interpretation of the standards themselves, because we are talking of feedback data management. So the taxonomy, for it to be interpreted correctly, it has to be interpreted with people that have the technical understanding, be it at the tools level that are going to be used to collect this data. At the same time, the technical understanding of the field. And now I'm talking about the community-based protection colleagues, those who do understand or who put together the workflow itself in terms of how the feedback mechanisms are going to be designed. So this is one thing that we picked up from Burundi. So in Burundi, the system is up and running currently in Bujumbura at pilot phase, and with, like I've said, with plans to expand it to other country or field offices, as well as bringing partners in on board. Then we also used the operational guiding principles in Ethiopia, where collaboratively WFP and UNHCR came together to harmonize their feedback or how they are going to coordinate feedback data management and protection desks. So instead of UNHCR and WFP having two parallel systems that are operating at one protection desk, we then got the influence from the guiding principles to produce only one tool because at food distribution points, the beneficiaries are the same. It's the same people. So this is the part that we picked from the guiding principles, where we ended up with a one system that will actually intake all the data into one platform. So far, as of now, the architecture of the system is in such a way that the data goes into Sugar CRM, which is a system for WFP, but through an API, sorry, I might go into the technical bits, but through an API, UNHCR will have access to the data. So in terms of resolution of cases, in terms of the management of data, in terms of the analysis of the data, at the end of the day, what we have is like one port of entry, and we are going to be having one analysis output from this collective effort. So this is the interoperability that my previous colleagues who talked were mentioning about. So this is also influenced from the operational guiding principles and the data standards. And then also quickly from Somalia, I'll pick an example from Somalia as well, where UNHCR have been taking a lead in terms of the establishment of an interagency contact center that will be used at the interagency level. This is a huge project for Somalia as a whole, where we will see that a contact center is functional, whereby all the partners at interagency level are actually using only one port of entry. So for this contact center, all the data that's going to be coming through from this contact center, it has to be structured in such a way that, in such a way that the guiding principles are outlining as per the template logbook. So as I've mentioned, this is a huge project that will take time, and as my colleagues have already said, buy-in from other from other partners is not an easy thing. You know, other operations already have their systems in place. They have other things that are working for them. So this takes time. So this is one big challenge that comes in when you're trying to also bring other colleagues on board. But as UNHCR with its own partners, the contact center, which is going to mirror this huge project, is already up, and the telecom company has already installed all the infrastructure that is needed, with all of the taxonomy from the guiding principles included. And that's the good thing that we managed to get from Somalia. But where it gets most interesting is at a regional level now, because I sit in the regional bureau. The taxonomy, the guiding principles have managed to help us now structure all our feedback mechanisms at country level, so that we'll be able to pull the data from all country operations with only one structure, with only one way in which we can interpret it. So this is a huge boost for us as regional bureaus, so, especially when we come to the point where we want to produce a regional level analysis, where we can at least have an understanding of the trends and how feedback resolution is going. So back to you, Manisha, for...
Super. Thanks so much, Pianos. Actually, and there was and I was wondering, as you were describing how you set those systems up and were able to share the data and the information, and it was a question that I saw in the Q&A earlier. Is there, that almost sounds like it's a very, here we are as organizations setting up the system, but ideally a community feedback mechanism should be designed by the community. So how much was the community involved in designing those systems, or was it more kind of, since we're sorting it out between agencies, we're doing it our way? If you could just answer briefly, because we're a bit behind schedule, please.
Okay, with regards to how the community was involved, I will share an experience from Burundi where before we set up our system, we noted the importance, of course, of including the feedback providers themselves. So we started by conducting a comprehensive digital communication and information needs assessment within the 5 refugee camps of Burundi. So this is the assessment that then informed us on how we are going to structure our system that we have now. Because for us to be able to put a system, we need to at least have an understanding of the information sources, of course, like where the refugees, how do they even communicate, or if they want to communicate their concerns, if they want to communicate their, suggestions or whatever it is with regards to the services that UNHCR and partners are providing, how are they doing it? So this is where we started. And also, how do they want to hear from us as UNHCR and partners? So it is this information needs assessment that we conducted in Burundi that at that point, this is where I would say that's our point of contact with the community. In this case, I'm referring to the refugees. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Piano, sorry. And I think that gives us a really good understanding of how you're able to use the package of guiding principles and standards. And really, the fact that you're able to now look at that data across the region is really quite reassuring, that you can then make those comparisons, especially in a refugee situation, so you can see how refugees from one country are perhaps responding or giving feedback differently in different countries. So that's really exciting. So thank you very much, Pianos. I'm now going to turn to Carla and Nagar, who are going to talk to us a little bit about how the operational guiding principles and standards are useful for individual agencies. And Carla, just as a reminder, is with UNICEF and Nagar is with WFP. So let me ask you, how do you see this new interagency package being operationally relevant for your organizations, and not just risking becoming yet another toolkit that's going to sit somewhere in an archive or on a bookshelf? Carla, do you want to go first?
Okay. But Nagar, if you want to, I'm very happy to also wait. Okay. I think we kind of use it in similar ways, so whoever goes first is fine. Okay, I think what I'm going to say, so first of all, I'm very happy to be here, so really happy to contribute to this rich conversation. I happen to sit within the global team that has actually developed those like this package, but also within my UNICEF. So I also wear my UNICEF hat. And when I go back to my daily job, I actually need to support my organization. And this kind of package came at a very timely, because UNICEF has commitment to AAP and wants to ensure accountability and to advance on AAP commitment. And one of the things that we at global level decided to do was and that came based on needs coming from our country offices, was to come up with this package of CFM package, complaints and feedback mechanism package, that included a digital tool where feedback could be stored and managed and could help in analysis and use of data, but also as all the guiding principles and SOPs that come with it to guide the country office on what do you do with this data, how do you categorize it, how do you manage it, how do you use it for decision-making processes. So basically, it came very timely for UNICEF. So to be very concise in my answer, because I don't need to spend 10 minutes telling you about it, but it helped us in 2 ways in UNICEF. Vertically, so I'm not talking collective. We very much believe in the collective, but for UNICEF per se, because we were also interested in developing our own global corporate CFM package, it helped us in 2 ways. First, in saving time and discussions, and in UNICEF we brought in many divisions in the organization, and we are a big organization, so we wanted to speak to our PSEA colleagues, we wanted to speak to our safeguarding colleagues, to our environmental and social standards colleagues, and to our AAP colleagues, so program colleagues, and come up with a system that could actually capture reports and feedback in these different areas, right? And so it would take a long time to sit on a table and kind of discuss what does it mean and how do we design a system that fits all of that. And the package had everything. It had a taxonomy, it had a glossary of all definitions and terminologies that we normally use to kind of refer to either feedback and complaints or to processes related to CFM. So really everything that a group of experts that would like to have to start designing a system, even at an individual agency level, is there in the package. So it allowed us to, instead of starting those discussions from scratch, what do we mean? What do we mean by which categories do we want to use? How do we design our digital system? Which categories should it be based on? Like, everything is there. So for us, it was kind of taking it as a basis to our discussions. Of course, we had proposed changes to it because we needed to, and we had multiple divisions involved in the conversation to become fit for purpose for everybody. But it was a foundation that actually helped us save a lot of time and a lot of technical discussions. And I want to just also perhaps highlight one important thing, which is that the experts that have developed that package, as Amanda said at the beginning, this took years. And those are experts that have CFM experience in the field. They've all sat together with all their knowledge to sort of come up with a package that could be as useful as possible. So to UNICEF, it was useful. So I'm telling you, in terms of saving time, saving discussions, saving, that kind of nice technical fights between teams, it was there and it helped us. So we designed our system based on the taxonomy of the package. We used the same glossary, of course, with little adaptations here and there. And we also will be using the analytical framework in the way we design our guidance on how do we guide our country offices to analyze feedback. So that is something that is quite important. So this is one. The second, simplification, starting from somewhere as a foundation, we had the basis. The second way in which it had is standardization. The fact that as a global team, we design our corporate package based on this CFM interagency package meant that now when it trickled down to country and when we test it in countries, we're going to provide them with the taxonomy and the glossary and the tools and template logbook that Piano's talked about, the analytical framework that is already agreed at a global level with other agencies. So when it trickled down to countries, it will provide that standardization across our country offices. But it also, if Negar does that with WFP and Alex does that with IFRC, and we encourage our team to trigger that package down to our respective country offices, it will kind of help them overcome the bottlenecks of talking to each other, because now they would be designing CFMs that talk to other sister agency CFMs. And that is extremely important in terms of vertical standardization, but also horizontal. Not standardization, hopefully standardization one day, but at least systems that talk to each other. So to me, that was an extremely helpful package, and I really hope it will be for the colleagues on the call. Over to Negar.
Super. Thanks. Negar, please. And from WFP's perspective, did you have a similar experience, or how have you used it differently?
No, definitely a similar experience. And if Carla focused on the technical bit, it's true, the standards and starting from somewhere. I would like to also add the political element of promoting standardization at the country office level and helping negotiations internally, because when you go with a package of standards saying that, it promotes interoperability, saying that it's been built at the interagency level, pushes this conversation forward and makes it easier to adopt. So that was internally, and we have actually adopted the standards. Now there's a toolkit available, everything that corresponds to the interagency package. And then our experience, and what I would do is quickly give some examples of what Carla was highlighting in terms of what can be done. And we have some country office examples. So for example, as Pianos also mentioned, this supported bilateral negotiations in Ethiopia, where it is very different to say, it's two agencies and each one of them have their own processes and framework, and they now have to join, and you have to say, you should adopt our type typology or this typology or that typology. Instead, we have a standard interagency package that addresses and kind of covers both sides. So it really helped us to say, you know, it's not the WFP intake form and taxonomy, rather the interagency one that we want to adopt. And I think this really was the key to a successful progress that we're kind of now implementing. And then also it's in the field, it promotes and facilitates system and process interoperability. So, for example, in Palestine, when we established the CFM, the WFP standard CFM as an emergency package, then we were able to then open it up to UNICEF and then share, accommodate their intake requests vis-a-vis the taxonomy, the IASC taxonomy. And also because we use that data structure and because we use the analytical framework that corresponded to like looking at analysis at the interagency collective level, we were able to, for example, identify humanitarian needs more broadly and present it at relevant clusters, and in particular in Palestine, both to the shelter cluster and to the disability clusters. It led to, first of all, an uptake of analysis and understanding of perception, but also concretely into development and establishment of referral pathways from WFP and UNICEF to the shelter cluster and the disability cluster to actually help people address their concerns. So I think this summarizes how we actually in the field utilized this package so far, and we're continuing to do so. Thank you. Over.
Super. Thanks so much. And I mean, you've already given a couple of examples there, Nagar, about how country operations have used it, but how has the package been useful for building capacity and strengthening CFMs in the operations? Is it that you're taking those elements, that standardization, the kind of taxonomy, or is there something, because also Pianos, I think it was, had mentioned, you know, that, or no, sorry, it was maybe Raphael, I can't remember, but how it depends on the technical sort of capacity of people on the ground and whether they're able to interpret what's in the package. So how have you been able to really take what has been developed at the global level and really help build that capacity at country level for CFMs?
I think maybe this has not been so direct, but what we have done is kind of the package has helped us identify themes to then include in our training. So let's say how you look at feedback, how you process feedback, how you need to analyze feedback, the principles behind it and the approach to it, like an analytical framework, is something that now we present to our country offices. We explain how at an individual level, but also more broader, you can present the learning in order to make them actionable. Let's say this is one element, or the processes, or how you need to why we categorize feedback the way we do, because 1, 2, 3, and this all comes from the collective experience, but also the resources available at the interagency.
Super, thanks. Carla, did you want to come on that on that question in terms of how the package has been useful for building capacity?
Very similar, very similar. I think, look, the package itself is written in a way, I mean, they're called guiding principles, so they can easily be turned into a guidance or a training package, and that's the beauty of it. So for example, I'm going to give you a concrete example quite quickly. Operational guiding principle number 3, we manage feedback according to its sensitivity and criticality. Where appropriate, we safely refer feedback to those in position to respond, escalate where needed, and close the action, close the loop. So it gives you step by step, how do you reach that? So what do you mean when we say we prioritize the safety and protection of feedback providers? What do we mean when we say we ensure timely action and individual loop closure? What do we mean when we talk about these different sub-elements of one operating guiding principles? And you have the steps that you need to do in order to reach that. And to me, if I want to turn that into capacity development material, it's in a you can do it very, very easily because they're written in a way that they can be turned into training materials very easily. And I know that those are the training needs that we get when our country offices reach out to us saying, do you have any capacity development modules on how to kind of collect, log, manage, analyze, and use feedback for decision making? Do you have these things? Another question that comes all the time, and that Negar also alluded to and I think I've also seen it somewhere in the chat here, but it's also a frequently asked question, is how do you kind of triangulate community feedback data with other sources of data? Because some country offices do not want to only rely on community feedback. They want more structured, big service kind of data. UNICEF is one of them. And I just came out of the meeting where we were talking about different data sources and how they come together. But the thing is, this package provides this analytical framework that actually tells people how do you triangulate different sources of data, including community feedback, to kind of bring actionable recommendations to the attention of decision makers and to make course connections and document course correction, which is something that I feel like all of us could be a bit better at. So this is how you can, this is how useful the package is. This is how easy it is to turn the content of the operation guiding principles into training materials. Over.
Super. Thank you so much, both. And we've got a ton of questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to call on all of you to help answer as many as we can in the last 30 minutes that we have or so. Just before that, I wanted to introduce one more resource person that we have here, and that's Ru Mateta, who is a protection officer focusing on AAP with UNHCR in Nairobi. Hi, Ru. Thanks for joining us. I think there's tons of questions, and I hope that you've all been on the panel have been looking at the various questions. The one that's got the most votes, so I think let me start with that, is I suppose the feedback for the feedback approach is coming. I think we've heard a little bit of that already, but I'd like to see as a first step for this to be based on the communication preference of the affected people. And I think there is somebody else who had also asked something similar to that. So I guess in a way, the question is, how does the package really make sure that not only are you making the back end of the system able to speak to, different agencies with all that kind of the taxonomy being the same, the data being the same, but how are you making sure that in the design of the CFMs, that it is done in a way that allows for the preferences of how populations and communities want to communicate? And there was also another question where somebody, sorry, it's taking me a while to scroll through the 36 questions. Somebody had mentioned about, is collective the right term, or should it be something more about kind of community-based or communal that might be able to emphasize the diverse accessibilities and abilities of individuals within communities? Because maybe, a collective feedback mechanism isn't going to really address those kind of diverse factors that you've got there. And then just a third one, and that way I'll throw those back to you, is do any of you have examples of good practice in relation to digital safeguarding? Because you've all talked about the data and how you can use that, but how do you make sure that that data is safe? Who can I throw those? Who wants to take the floor first?
If I can start with the
Carla,
first
please.
one, maybe on how do we ensure the voices of people are heard when we design. I mean, it's in one of the operational guiding principles to say, when you design, this is what they are. This is what the operation. So they're not just standards. They're not that usual set of standards that you put in the drawer. Trust me, they are guiding principles that will help you. So read them, go through the package, and you will understand what I'm saying. And I'm not trying to market here. It's been useful for me, so I think it's for some of us, so might be useful for you. My answer to that is in one of the operational guiding principles that it is clearly stated that any design of any CFM should be based on an assessment of community preferred communication channels. So before you actually design anything, you need to go and ask the communities, if you want to reach out to us, or if you want to communicate with us, or if you want to raise any kind of complaint or report on anything that's not been happening in the way you want, in which which way you would prefer that. Sometimes it's, you know, phones. Sometimes people do not have access to phones. Sometimes you are in low connectivity settings, so you need other means. Sometimes you prefer a face-to-face approach because you trust that community social workers that keeps coming to you every weekend to sort of tell you about something. So it differs, and any complaints and feedback mechanism, for it to be successful, it has to be based on what people prefer in terms of communication channels, because trust is a key element. If people don't trust that the channel is safe and that the channel is going to get them a response on time, they're not going to use your system. So all the efforts will go in vain. And that is in the operational guiding principles. So I hope that answers. If there's further, if my colleagues want to answer or add to that, over to you.
Super. Thanks so much, Carla. I don't know if anybody wants to add to it, but I know, Amanda, you were going to try and tackle the collective versus community-based. Maybe, and if anybody else wants to come in that, maybe Pianos on the data one, you might be able to help on the digital safeguarding, if I can come to you.
Yeah. Yes, Manisha, maybe I will just add on, but Carla has already pointed out, you know, the requisites that are needed when you are setting up a feedback mechanism, right? And for us, the systems based, we might end up, you know, focusing much on putting together how the system is going to function. But at the end of the day, you can't go to Muyinga, for example, and put up a feedback box where you don't even know those people prefer that form of communication. Maybe their concern needs an in-person kind of interaction. So in that case, that information needs assessment, and digital communication assessment is very important. I'll give an example for Burundi, where we noted that the mobile penetration in Burundi is very low, especially among the refugee camps because of their location. You know, almost like only 22% of the population amongst our responses had access to a phone with access to internet, like beyond, like a smartphone. You know, it was like very low. Meaning to say, and what we got also from that assessment was largely in terms of preference. It was the community meetings, like where they see, and to be honest, the refugees actually indicated that we actually want like in person. This is where they can actually raise their concerns. So that's the best way to set up a mechanism in place. And for us on the technical front, it also helps us then, how are we going to pull all this data now? Because data that comes from the digital platforms is easy. It's structured in such a way that already you can pull it. But we also need to be careful of the data that comes from the community-based initiatives, right? We need to set up systems also on how we can internalize all this data, because my experience working with the AAP team right now is the most important piece of information, not I wouldn't say the most, but it is the feedback itself, which is qualitative. And I think colleagues can agree that the qualitative component is not so easy to put it through a form of analysis that you can get from the quantitative data. But once you have a population that prefers the engagement through the community-based initiatives, then there must be systems in place that are able to do the analysis for this data, so that at least we can have an informed insight in terms of what we get from this data, right? So nowadays we have AI that's helping us to look into all those participatory assessments, focus group discussions, all those other initiatives. At least we can pull something from the data. So that's it for me on this part. Then Super. You asked something about the digitalization. What was
it was about digital safeguarding. And actually, when you mentioned AI, artificial intelligence, I was going to ask the same question. Is a lot of those systems mean, you know, putting that information into the cloud. So how do we make sure that the safety of those who provided the feedback is guarded, as well as the data itself in terms of safeguarding the data? How do we make sure that that's there? And that, because somebody else had asked around, how do we ensure the safety of those providing the feedback, especially if we're using AI, for example?
Yeah, I might maybe let me say the best thing here is include the feedback providers themselves, the community. Explain to them how their data is going to be collected and where the data is going to go. This is the most important thing. Again, bring them to the loop, bring them on the table, right? So that they know, okay, fine, their data is going to be collected, taken into this container for analysis, and this is how your data is going to be protected. For example, as UNHCR. We and WFP, I understand UNICEF, all the agencies, they do have their own mechanisms in which they have secured their data into their own internal servers that are quite secure, and there's always the data sharing agreements that always organizations put together, so that if we need to do sharing data from UNHCR to WFP or the other partners, we need to agree at what level are we going to share this data, and also bring in on board. I saw another question with regards to the technical capacities, like bring on board all the people that are needed, be it the community-based colleagues, also bring the technical colleagues, right? Those ones, so that at least they can unpack all these other nitty-gritties, what really needs to be done or what really needs to be put in place for the data to be safe. And once the safety is guaranteed, also the community becomes all flexible, and they also, willing also to be using the mechanisms that you would have put in place. But if all these things are not ironed out to the communities, it might be difficult to, you'll find that, like I gave an example of feedback box, you might find is 15 weeks, no one has ever posted anything there because this was not really explained in terms of the workflow. So there has to be that need to bring everyone on board, both the field colleagues as well as the technical colleagues.
Super. Thanks so much, Pianos. Amanda, do you want to take the collective one? And then Rue, I'm going to come to you after that too. I'm going to ask you all to keep your answers relatively short, please, so we can get through more of those like 30 questions, please. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks. Yeah, the collective term is always something that we could consider interchangeable with other ways that we, depending on the lens that we're using, right? I mean, what collective AAP or collective mechanisms for accountability to affected people, usually understood as a response-wide mechanism that brings together the actors, the response actors, to strengthen engagement with and accountability to affected people. Now, we also have spoken to people who deploy and support different organizations and work more directly with communities, who feel that collective actually should reflect collective as in us with communities. And so it should definitely be much more kind of focused around that. One thing is certain is that we do need to 100% acknowledge that we don't just have individual feedback. We have trends that are different for different groups, and depending on those varying diversity factors that can create specific needs for groups in the community. And I think that is reflected adequately in how we articulate the standards, but certainly the term collective, in terms of when we look at a collective mechanism, speaks to the mechanism at the level of the response for engaging communities. Now, this does just touch, and I'm so sorry, Manisha, I have to touch on this a little bit, because it also touched on, what is the CFM at the level of response versus what is an interagency CFM. Now, when we talk about a collective mechanism, what we're really saying is it's about the every single channel. If whether one of those is an interagency hotline or one of those is findings that were shared by field colleagues at the end of the week or at the end of the month. So it is really looking at taking stock of all of those things. So when we talk about a collective CFM or collective mechanism, we aren't necessarily talking about a channel that's implemented by multiple agencies. We're looking at having a really big view of the landscape of the different ways that we're communicating with communities. And again, this also has something to do with what different cultures are around how we engage and acquire feedback from communities. There are a couple of other questions about quantification of feedback leading to inaction. So we can't act on information that we can't see as a record in a database. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we're looking at at tackling. So also within the operational guiding principles and standards, we try to address and make sure that those kind of findings, the informal things, the less structured feedback makes its way to a discussion around what are the main findings of feedback and how that works, how that fits into other information. So I don't know, it's there are so many different things that touch on that particular question. So I'm very open to follow up. If anybody has one, please post it in there. But I hope that that kind of covers some of the different subjects that that touches upon.
Super. Thanks so much, Amanda. Rue, I know you wanted to come in, and then I've got some more questions I want to throw back to the panel.
Yep. Thanks, Manisha. No, I think Amanda has really covered that quite well. Maybe the other thing to actually add is sometimes we are caught up so much in definitions that we lose the essence of the mechanisms, because then others would refer to it as community feedback mechanisms, others as common feedback mechanism. But I think the essence is, and the spirit of the package is that, and this ties to a reflection that I saw in the chat, that it should be applied different contexts, whether you have your own individual mechanism as an organization that you established, which accommodates different channels, or whether each agency, for example, is basically implementing their own mechanism, but then you're collectively analyzing that data. So it doesn't mean that you only have to go, for example, the Uganda way, where you have to have one interagency mechanism and that's it, but you can have multiple across the different agencies. And so the principles themselves look at the collective level where we're all actually able to invest in it, whether it is, for example, in Burundi, you're preparing your individual agencies to be able in terms of applying the package, so that in the event you actually start setting up at collective level, you're all prepared, or at the second level where you each have your own mechanism, and at country level or response level, you're doing joint analysis. So that can also be applied, or it's where you have an interagency feedback mechanism that you can actually apply to. And I think one of the main starting points in the principle of the guiding package is around defining what your objective is when you're applying this package. I think when you're defining that, then whatever terminology you use, you can easily just define what that would entail and that process that would be covered. Thanks. Back to you, Manisha.
Super. Thanks so much, Rue. There's a lot of excellent questions, but here's a really big one that I think is really critical. If AAP remains underfunded as it is and not given the importance by organizations themselves internally, how do you expect the uptake of such a wonderful package and the plans around AAP? So really, again, that political level, if we don't have that commitment and buy-in, how is that going to get taken up? And then a couple of very practical questions that are here as well. You know, what can you do when a community has actually lost trust in the complaint mechanism? Does the package help you figure out how to regain that trust? And then some of the questions around sort of language and accessibility. How do you manage different languages, especially when you're in a setting where you may have numerous languages? Somebody, I think the example was in Congo, where you've got lots of different dialects and different languages being spoken. How does the CFM package help you address those kind of challenges? So that really big one about how do we make sure it gets taken up given the underfunding and lack of prioritization? How do we build back trust? And is that part of the package? And then how do we deal with sort of the language and also accessibility over time?
I can take the political one, and not to pretend that I have the answer, but just perhaps to share an experience. It's a big question. I don't think any of us has a. There's no right or wrong, but I don't think we have like it's the $1 million question. Look, I mean, this package does not come in a vacuum. Okay, so you want to have a CFM package. It means you are a bit advanced on your CFM agenda in your agency. I think there's a lot of sensitization that should happen around AAP in each agency. In UNICEF, this came 6 years later. 6 years later, 6 years of, I'm not saying take 6 years, that's a long time. I'm just saying try to pave your way in terms of sensitization, advocacy internally to sort of secure the funding, some of the funding, and kind of get senior management on board. One additional thing that helped for us in terms of CFM and is to kind of bring different teams of UNICEF together, right? Like PSCA had their own thing, AAP, you know, child safeguarding wanted to develop their own, ESS, environmental and social standards. With the World Bank, they were tasked to kind of also develop their own. So it actually, when we got together as technical people and we kind of presented that to our senior management. We were like, you have to invest in something, and then and that is something, instead of we are being cost efficient, we're bringing ourselves together, but then you will have to invest in at least one system that brings us all together. First, because it makes sense, but also because, you know, I mean, it's out there. So I think I don't have the answer to you for that one, but I feel like from our experience, it's not like that. You need to start with an advocacy piece, an internal sensitization piece, try to bring in the added value of AAP to your different team members, and where it could help, how it could help different teams really reach their objectives within your organizations, to try and sort of get the traction that it needs. Some organizations are not there yet, but I think this it's like worth trying when we are passionate about this agenda. But I just wanted to let people, that's my personal opinion. Like if you're not there yet, also showing that this package exists and that a bunch of agencies have sat to work on it also could be one advocacy tool internally within your agency to kind of say, like, you know, there are NGOs and UN agencies that have sat together, and now and that package is being used by a lot of local actors. So we're kind of out of that momentum if we don't kind of also adopt it now. So now is the time, kind of thing. So I hope it answers a bit, but just to say, a sensitization process, in my view, is kind of important and is a prerequisite to any type of AAP work at collective level. It should start vertically within your organization, so that your organization becomes open to collective approaches. Over.
Super. Thanks so much. Alex, I think you wanted to come in. I know that you were
super quick. I just think we need to be careful not use funding as an excuse for not doing something, because that's a tendency we have in the humanitarian sector. I've been in responses, they are rare, but they exist, are fully funded, where AAP has still not been fully prioritized, and we still didn't do a very good job as humanitarian actors. So I still think it's one that's not an excuse. So I think we need to be creative. There's always funding shortages. There's always, AAP is not the only sector that's seeing funding issues and deprioritization. So, you know, we need to be creative and really think about, and I could talk about this for a long time, but I won't because of time, but I think there's different ways to approach it, and it's not an excuse to not adopt these standards. And secondly, as well, just to say that I think there's more and more demand for feedback, actually maybe too much demand, that we're not taking the time to actually look at how are we using feedback? Are we actually using it properly? So, you know, donors like FCDO, for instance, have this as a major indicator, but often they're process indicators. So how many feedback systems do you have in place, et cetera? They ask all of our organizations here today about that when they give us core funding, which is great. And I think that's a first step. But I think the next step would really like, how is this feedback being used? Because having a feedback mechanism in place doesn't mean that it's effective and that we're actually using these insights to improve, right? We discussed this today. So I do think there are a lot of incentives in place for us to bring this package forward and for people to take it on. It's, at the end of the day, it's, as I said earlier, cultural change and goodwill. Over.
Super. Thanks so much, Alex. In terms of the performance management and the trust, Amanda or Carla? Amanda, you were going to come up with the trust bit, I think.
I'm just seeing some links, you know, this question. I mean, when we lose trust, you know, it's always, it's a time to regroup. And again, the standards, the guiding principles and standards are really about that process of coming together and problem solving. So I think it speaks a little bit as well to the question from Stein on transparency. You know, how do we guarantee transparency, you know, before we collect feedback, during our interventions, and how we make decisions, and after actions have been taken. And, you know, there are several ways in which the package speaks to those, but really it is a little bit about how actors are able to sit down together and assess where they're going. And this also touches on the idea of accessibility of the mechanism and how well feedback is captured from different groups. So what it is needing to regularly monitor and review together what kind of information are we using to measure how effective these elements of our CFM are. how our feedback channels are set up for two-way communication, meaning, are the information, is the information we're providing, are the tools that we have for coordinating response to feedback adequate? How is our standard messaging? What is the temperature read on how quickly we can respond to feedback? And that was another question that came up in the Q&A. So it is a little bit about the development of these tools together, having a discussion about taking stock. Where are they? Do we have a common repository for messaging or not? And should we start building one? And where are the weaknesses and how we're coordinating and sharing feedback? What are the risks? So it's a little bit more focused, that the standards provide the opportunity to say, oh, these are the things that we should be talking about as a community response actors, no matter how big or group or large that group may be, with the goal of obviously making sure that is at least the inclusion, the representation of our local counterparts are there, because those are our trusted channels. Those are our most used channels, and those will ensure that, at least in terms of, for example, language requirements, we are hitting the mark. So these are the different elements, I think, that all speak to that problem solving side of things, how we're troubleshooting and reviewing the effectiveness of our mechanism together.
Super. I wanted to see, because Raphael and Nagar, you've not come in. Did you want to come in on any of these questions? And Rue as well. I'll come back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Manisha. I was just laughing when that was being shared, but thanks for the other colleagues that have already shared their thoughts. Just wanted to share the experience in the Ugandan context. I think we as ULAN have been working with different response actors, especially focusing on building their capacity on the AAP. And this has been one of the major issues that partners have shared, the loss of trust on some of the mechanisms that that the partners have put in place. But from the discussions, discussions with the different organizations, you discover that maybe because say, for example, suggestion boxes were set up at a certain point. So project managers simply just, somebody sits and thinks that because we have suggestion boxes in maybe in a particular location, if I move to another place when I'm developing a new project, I simply think of setting up suggestion boxes. And that does not really work in particular locations. You find the different contexts really need to be taken into consideration. And then also the aspect of addressing the issues that communities raise. I'll give an example of the help desks in most of the locations in Uganda. You find if communities keep raising issues through the help desks that have been set up, and communities don't receive feedback from the actors, automatically they lose that trust. But we've seen when actors organize, say, for example, integrated meetings where they're able to address a number of these issues that have been raised, the trust begins to be built in and people begin to utilize the mechanisms that have been put in place. I quickly wanted also to talk about the funding issue. As I mentioned, we're currently working with different response actors, supporting them to build their capacity on AAP, and we work closely with UNHCR. In Uganda, we had really big issue here. Most of the organizations needed more knowledge on AAP, and we decided to work with UNHCR and set up a 6-month online training for AAP, how you can maybe to learn more about AAP, how you can integrate it into the project lifecycle, how you close the feedback loop. And that really has been a game changer. It has changed a lot how we do our work within Uganda as the response actors. And at the end of that training, there was also need for the follow-up sessions. And so we came up with the AAP in Action program. And so organizations reach out for individualized, specialized technical support. And they are taken through that kind of support, technical support, for the 6-month period. And one of the areas is on how to integrate AAP into the proposal narratives and all that. So we've gotten feedback. A number of organizations are coming back and saying, we are getting more funding, to support our AAP initiatives within our organizations. So I think it's really about how we become intentional and see how we ensure that AAP is integrated right from the proposal development process, not just waiting for, to apply this in our work without really integrating it right from the the proposal development phase. Thank you so much.
Super. Thanks so much, Raphael. And there was a question actually, which I think is links to that, is when you're doing a needs assessment, how do you take on board community feedback so that when you're making those proposals, they're based on community feedback of what the needs are. So it is really ensuring that community feedback is throughout the program cycle and not just at certain points in time. Nagar, Ru, did you want to come in? And then I'm going to do a little wrap up before we close.
Yeah, so in a minute, I think they've raised very valid points. And I think the one thing we need to put in mind is that when you're looking at feedback overall, we should not always forget the other components that make AAP. So around how we communicate, how we engage and work with communities. And then there's always been an aspect where we would want to assume that setting up feedback mechanisms is also about having adequate or a lot of resources. But I think it's always good in that engagement, once you've assessed the community, which are the community preferred channels, for example, to come back and also triangulate what resources are available and what is feasible. Because sometimes you might not have money to set up a sophisticated complaint and response mechanism or system, but it might actually use very simplified mechanisms or softwares to actually analyze a lot of the data. And there's a lot of examples around that. And when we are triangulating data, for example, we might not be able to actually act on all the community feedback that we get in. So the fact that we always just look at giving individual feedback, that has always been a gap in terms of also ensuring that we are losing trust within the community. How do we go back and feedback and say, when we even triangulated, for example, the feedback we are getting from you with other data sources, for example, and the resources that we have, this is the decision that we took and this is how we responded to that, and what roles can communities play. So even as we're engaging in terms of feedback, let's not forget the other components that make AAP. Thank you. Back to you, Manisha.
Super. Thanks for that reminder. I think that's a really important one. It is one component, not the be all and end all of AAP. Nagar, did you want to come in quickly on anything?
I mean, quickly, maybe on the use of information in other clusters, because I think there's some questions about how the clusters could better use the data. But in general, I think making sure that also at that level, communities are engaged in kind of developing a collective strategy on how to use the information, but then also a way to understand the information needs of different clusters, groups, and how this can be fed into, or with what data points would be relevant, how to collectively provide this, and how this framework could basically promote that. I think that's one thing that we could practically use the package for as well. And at the coordination level, to consider this as a need and make sure this is addressed.
Super. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. I know there's a ton of questions that we didn't manage to get to, but our panelists will type answers and we'll be able to share those responses following this session and when we send out the recording as well. So basically, just to give you a quick overview, I think this has been work that has been a long time coming. We have been talking about collective complaints and feedback mechanisms for a long time, but we have seen that we're not very good necessarily at really using that feedback to inform our responses. The mechanisms may not always be used, or they may be misused, there may be misrepresentation. And there's been very different systems that have been created. So the package of operational guidance and principles, and I've forgotten the title of it already. It's a very long title. The package of standards and principles is the work of organizations that have been dealing with community and complaints and feedback mechanisms for many, many years, and really bringing together that collective work and identifying common ways in which to set up community feedback mechanisms and be able to ensure that the information is interoperable or shareable across different organizations. It is something that does require technical know-how and understanding, so it may require some capacity building within organizations, but it will save organizations as individual organizations or also as collective interagency bodies time and able to set with these collective feedback mechanisms up. And we can call them whatever you like, CFMs, CBCMs, collective feedback, community-based, But as Bruce said, you know, we don't want to get away from the essence, which is really about using the feedback that people are providing. It does, however, require that goodwill across organizations, that political buy-in, and making sure that it is prioritized as a package, as part of the package of accountability to affected populations, and making sure that we're doing it in a collective system, in a sense. The tool itself isn't actually, even though we've been talking about it, how it's being used in some of these organizations, it's not yet available for you to take a look at, because I know many of you will be quite excited to see it. It will be coming out as part of a package from the Interagency Standing Committee Task Force. Hopefully in the next month, it'll be on the page, the web page of the task force of the Interagency Standing Committee, and we will share it once available to all of you who have registered and are with us today. So watch out for that. It's coming soon. I just want to say a huge thanks to all our panelists and all our speakers, to Jesse, Amanda, Carla, Pianos, Alexandra, Raphael, Nagar, and Rue. Huge thanks for taking the time to really unpack what's in the package and highlight how well it's been working. So thank you very much for that. And for everyone online, I invite you to join us at the next 3 sessions that we have on AAP. We've got one tomorrow at 10 o'clock Geneva time, Central European summertime, on strengthening collective capacity for AAP. And then on Thursday, we have 2 sessions. The first is in the morning at 10 o'clock on coordination of cross-cutting areas in humanitarian settings, and in the afternoon on Rumors Don't Have Borders, misinformation in humanitarian and peacekeeping settings. And next week at Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Week in person, you can visit the AAP Help Desk, and there's also another session next Thursday on leadership. So look out for all the, along with other AAP sessions. So thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for the tech support, Marcus. And I wish all of you a great day, and thank you for your active engagement and for joining us today. Thank you.